Well, hello, everybody. My name is Stephen D. Kelly, and this is the Stephen D. Kelly Show, and we are Truth Cat Radio, the one and only Truth Cat Radio. And thank you for being with me here tonight. It is now 6:01. It's September 26, 2024. I keep track of all these dates because, it's been going on, quite a few years with these shows have been piling up here. And I'm kind of looking forward to tonight's show because I think it's kind of important at the same time. It's going to be a little bit different, a little bit of a departure. I'll do my best. Somebody made a comment the other day. They said they want a transcript for the show. And I go, transcript? I'm like, dude, this isn't written down anywhere. He says, really? Wow, that's impressive. It's like, yeah, this is all what I call spewing or ad lib. Anyway, the title of tonight's show, which is kind of eerily similar to last week's show. Last week's show, of course, the title was "The Government is the Enemy." This week's show, the title is "The Government is the Cartel." Now, I came up with that at the last minute because I wanted to get some people over here, but it might give you a bit of a hint of the flavor that we're going to get into tonight. Now, bear in mind, when I talk about Occupy the Getty and I do these shows, this is something I don't really talk about, and I'm going to get into this a little bit because this is certainly was part of my life, and it was certainly part of our recent history, something that's still ongoing. Some people refer to this as the drug war, is what I'm talking about. But it all started, well, if you read the beginning of my book, you'll know it all started when somebody told me about a death squad in some Central American country, and it kind of blew my buzz when they got to killing the animals. Anyway, being the bored guy that I am, sometimes I watch Netflix at night, and I saw this show, Narcos, and I've been avoiding it for a while, but I decided to turn it on. I thought, what the heck, it's adult entertainment. And it started out talking about Pablo Escobar. And again, they go into different stories about different people involved in the narcotics trade, but it was focused immediately on Pablo Escobar. And my immediate impression was, I thought, oh, this has got misrepresentations. It's not mentioning the proper mobsters and the various different mafias and guys like Robert Vesco and what have you, the real organization of what's going on. But it did allude to a lot, and it had a reoccurring theme. And the reoccurring theme, of course, was the government was in on everything. Everything. Always was. It was the mafia. Ultimately, it came down to the government. Now, my experience, of course, with the CIA started in 1987, and it wasn't until many, many years later, after having been involved with the Oliver North gang, that I even realized I was working with the NSA at one time, but I was actually working very heavily with the people who were farming the Contras, and basically the people that were running that entire terrorist organization at the behest of the United States. Again, I was very naive then, and I think I still retain a certain amount of that. And when I watched this show, even though I know it's drama, at the same time, it kind of took that away because it filled in a lot of blanks, you might say. And it's a relatively long story. I want to get into it, but what you're going to see is that I had secondary, tertiary, tangential connections to all these various different mobsters at various different times throughout this period. My brother did, I did. We knew about things. We knew who shot who, this kind of thing. And back in those days, of course, we liked to smoke pot. And for the most part, this stuff was Mexican. And that's going to actually be a big part of the story. And of course, if anybody that, was a young adult in the 80s probably dabbled in cocaine, it's one of those things. But that whole culture was very much involved in it. And it wasn't by accident. It wasn't because a bunch of gangsters decided to do this. It was, on the contrary, it was a government scheme. But so I watched this show. I watched the Pablo Escobar stuff, and of course, it's a lot of it's drama. And in the process of telling the story of Pablo Escobar, they also tell you about the KELLEY cartel. Pablo Escobar, of course, being the Medellin cartel, and he was number one, and KELLEY cartel was number two. Pablo Escobar moved most of his cocaine through the Gulf of Mexico, through Bahamas, through aircraft and this sort of thing, Barry Seal and all that sort of stuff. That wouldn't go on forever. The KELLEY cartel, on the other hand, used Mexico. They transported it in trucks over the land in Mexico, or flew it partway and then transported over the border, and did use their various different connections down there. Now, one thing I did learn about during this show, aside from the various different players and what happened to them and how they were involved and who they were paying off, and the ultimate story of what happened to what's-his-face, the Medellin cartel, Escobar. If we all remember, we should remember when he got shot on the roof. But I learned about the way the Mexicans were set up, and basically what they have is they have these plazas. They call them plazas, and this is gang territory. And if I can remember these guys, Juarez is a big one. Sinaloa is a big one. Tijuana, of course, is a big one. Guadalajara is a big one. And then there's the Gulf territory. I guess the guys that are, whatever that is, they call it the Gulf. And they all do various things. Obviously, my experience was mostly through Tijuana, obviously, because that's where we live. Southern California, Tijuana's right there. But there was other stuff going on. My brother was involved with these guys in Tijuana. My earliest experience with the CIA, very, very first experience with the CIA, was in Las Vegas when I was doing a big show for Conrad Hilton. It was a big New Year's Eve party. Baron Hilton? Yeah, Conrad, Baron, one of these guys. Baron Hilton, I think. Anyway, my brother, of course, being the flake that he is, decided that he needed to fly off to Mexico City to take care of business down there. And of course, this was with mobsters, because mobsters like to build nightclubs and things like that, and they throw a lot of money around. And of course, the drugs are attractive too. I'm sure it's all very attractive. But he walked away from that and jeopardized Las Vegas, got himself blackballed in Las Vegas over this, and left me in the lurch trying to manage this project. Project came off, but the hotel never forgave him. It was the Hilton. Anyway, that was the first experience of being, kind of connected to that stuff, and that was back in '87. The Oliver North people crowd wouldn't come until much later, of course, but there was no hiding what it was. And I knew Gary Webb. I knew about the cocaine coming into Los Angeles, and I knew about how the gangs were distributing it and everything else, the guns and what have you. I knew guys like Tosh Plumley, who flew the drug planes for the CIA and actually flew flights from everywhere, Honduras, Mexico, Cuba, you name it, the airfields of communists, airfields of guerrillas, whatever, into the United States, actually into Mena. The other place they flew into was El Toro, here in Southern California. The commandant for El Toro suicided himself, kind of like Gary Webb suicided himself when he exposed all this stuff. Of course, Mena, Arkansas, we know what that's all about. That was Bill Clinton, and they suicided Waco to keep it quiet. That's what Waco was. The other thing they did was they suicided Barry Seal, and they threw Noriega in jail, and they made Clinton presidential nominee. Well, the reason why any of this makes any difference is because, of course, I knew the real thing. I knew what was going on. I had a closer experience. I knew it wasn't like they were showing in these movies. It wasn't necessarily singular mafioso guys. It wasn't necessarily a paramilitary group operating somewhere. It wasn't even necessarily the CIA. We know it was actually the NSA hiding behind the CIA thing. So in the show, the CIA were always the bad guys. They were always the guys that were turning in somebody, leaking information to blow a big operation, whatever. They're always supporting the wrong people, of course, you would think. And they're also behind all the death squads and this stuff, which, of course, is very accurate. One of the things that came up in this, when they're talking about Pablo Escobar, is there were these paramilitary groups operating in Colombia against the FARC, which were communist. And ultimately, they called these guys Los Pepes. And if anybody knows anything about QAnon, we know about Pepe. So when you see this Los Pepe, you wonder which came first. Why wouldn't it be? Los Pepes was the NSA operation to destroy Pablo Escobar. It was the name of their gang. It seems awful close to the QAnon experience. Anyway, so I watched these shows to the end, and I watched the one where they're basically killed off Pablo Escobar, and then they started it over practically from the perspective of the KELLEY cartel. You know, it was a made-for-TV series, of course, so it took a long time to get through this. And there were many players in the KELLEY cartel, and of course they used these plazas to distribute their drugs. Well, when that series was over, I started the next one, and of course the next one was involving Mexico. And by this time, this was just entertainment. I was just using this to occupy myself. And they opened up the first scene of this new series, and they got this Mexican actor that I recognized. I just seen him on this space shuttle movie here not too long ago. He was in a whole bunch of different movies. He was with Mark Wahlberg and Shooter or something like that. You know, they basically stick him in all the character parts where you're supposed to play a goofy, lovable Mexican type dude, right? Anyway, so they trundle this guy, this actor, and he's all beat up, and they trundle him into a seat. He's got a hood on his head. This guy, he's got a hood on his head. They throw him into the seat and tie him up, pull the hood off, and there it is. And the background, the dialogue, they're saying, we all remember when the drug war started. And they said it started with this one guy here, Enrique Camarena. And I saw that. I'm like, oh. And it hit me. Because I'll tell you the story, but I had to turn it off right there. I didn't want to see it. Because I know the story. I know what happened to this guy. I didn't want to see it. But at the same time, I realized that I didn't know anything about what he was involved in, what he was doing, who he was up against, what his successes were, what he did to piss these people off to cause what happened to him to happen to him. Now, the reason, of course, is why they say this is where the drug war started, is because up until this time, there really was no effort to stop drugs or to interfere with the system, because it was essentially mafia, and the mafia was connected to the government, and the government served our purposes, and it was helped pay for things like the Contras in Nicaragua, you know, that kind of thing, or say even the black budget that goes into the, you know, bunkers that goes, you know, takes half our GDP. Trust me, they get this money everywhere they can. Again, this was something I knew about, but when I was married, you know, and I was moving from my condominium into my first house, per se, there was a period of time when I was living in my in-laws' home. Okay, I had built let's just say I added like 900 square feet of living space to their attic, and I was living up there with my wife and child, and we had one on the way, which was actually born while we were staying there. We were only there for a year. But anyway, so I was living with my father-in-law. Now, my father-in-law is this big Mexican dude, and he's got a nickname, and they call him Dirty Dan. And I didn't really think about that too much until I knew, when I figured Dirty Dan, what does that mean? Is he screwing around with women on the job? Is he screwing around with some of the, doing crazy things with some of the women he's interrogating and stuff like that? I mean, that's what I think, dirty. But then I remembered a bunch of stuff. And one of the stories I remembered is when there was some people making snuff films in California. And they killed some girls out in the desert here out in California, San Bernardino County or Riverside County, one of the two, probably San Bernardino. But there was a joint task force, of course, and it involved Orange County and San Diego County because of the connections. And this guy, at this time in his life, was working with district attorney's office. He was an investigator, and he did all kinds of crazy things, but homicide, whatever. When he was doing Vice, it was the worst of all of them because he had to see the worst of all the shit. And you just get poisoned when you get involved in stuff like that. I knew. But one time, this snuff thing, they caught the guys. They caught them in Tijuana, I believe, somewhere in Mexico, Baja, between Tijuana and Ensenada. And they got together with all the various agencies and people, detectives, whatever, that were involved in this case with their Mexican compatriots, compadres, compas. And they had a barbecue on the beach while they had big pieces of wood stuck out in the surf with the suspects tied to these poles. And they had a barbecue while the tide came in, and they let these guys, that's how they did it. I'm sure they beat the crap out of them and tortured them quite a bit before they had it. But see, that was my first experience to how things work. And of course, it was like, they got those guys. We don't really think about it. This cooperation in committing these acts, which are, above the law, below the radar, whatever, extracurricular legal stuff. Well, anyway, again, all this changed when they killed this Enrique Camarena guy. Now, Enrique Camarena was actually somebody that my father-in-law was dealing with. It was one of his people when they would go to, he was DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and whenever he went to Mexico, invariably half the time he'd be dealing with it because, of course, Enrique Camarena was trying to take down these Mexican mafias and, and what have you, and there had to be a lot of interaction between these various jurisdictions to make this stuff happen. And they provide resources and things like that. But anyway, he was one of the guys. Now if you know this guy, the father-in-law character, he was, again, big Mexican dude. He's the sort of dude you expect to be gregarious, rude, loud, likes to drink the tequila, this kind of thing. But at the same time, somebody you don't want to piss off, capable of bending the rules. But this was one of his guys. And I remember the night when he came home and he had just found out what had happened to this guy Camarena, because they found his body, of course, and he had been tortured and done all kinds of things to keep him alive. They would inject him with adrenaline into his heart just to keep him alive during torture. And of course, he was American. They got a lot of information out of him. And all the information basically was everything, including what they knew about all the people in government that were connected to the whole operation, including the Secretary of Defense and the then candidate for president and all kinds of other fun people, all the various different state police agencies and federal police agencies, et cetera, et cetera. They had it all. They got it all out of him. It became very valuable information. But the point is that This, I remember it very well because for me, I mean, obviously, I'm a lot older, but when I was 5 or 6 or whatever the hell it was, they shot Kennedy, and I remember exactly where I was when they shot JFK. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I won't forget the image in my head. And I can remember exact same thing when I found out about this guy Enrique Camarena, Kiki Camarena, they called him. I was in the kitchen, or I was in the living room, whatever, in between the kitchen and family room, looking over the bar, and I heard about it, and I was just, 10 feet away from him when he said it happened. And now, of course, he was devastated because this stuff doesn't happen. Didn't happen. Just doesn't happen. American law enforcement doesn't get tortured to death and their bodies dumped on the side of the road. That did not happen to American federal agents. It was unheard of. Anyway, a lot changed after that happened. Of course, this is when the real drug war began, and this was during, let me see, what was it? It wasn't Reagan. I think it was just now George Bush had started. George Bush Sr. was running the country. Now, bear in mind, when I was doing most of my NSA stuff, it was under Clinton. Okay. But now this was George Bush, and we always knew that it was Reagan. It was Nixon, it was Reagan. Those were the guys that were the most responsible for Oliver North and ultimately the Intertel Mafia and everything we're dealing with. Of course, we like to think of conservatives when we think of this stuff because you think of guys like Donald Trump or William Barr. They're more likely to be involved with Intertel than, say, somebody like Clinton, who would just be a low functionary. But before I go on, I'm just going to say that what I realized the other day when this had happened, and of course this changed the world basically because this certainly changed the rules, everything that went on in Mexico and how they treated everything and how they started this big ass war on drugs, which of course is a joke. But the point is that it didn't even occur to me at the time that these people that killed this guy were the same people that I was associated with, that I was working for. That was my first, the beginning of the wake up. Because I realized that at the same time I'm living in this guy's house. Now, I'm not saying he's a good guy. Don't get me wrong. I don't consider him a good guy whatsoever. But at the same time, we all took part of the grief. And if I ask someone today, hey, you ever heard of Enrique Camarena? I go, no. Why would I know about that guy? But you should. Anyway, so that was rough, but I had to watch the rest of it. And then I learned about the various different plazas or the gangster families that control the different areas. And it was the guy that figured out how to, well, what happened was I'm not even going to try to give you the names. Well, Carlos Quintero, he was the guy that came up with a sensimilla. He came up with seedless marijuana. And he made a deal with the government, the Mexican government, to take a big plot of land and grow this stuff in an area of the state. I think it was, anyway, it was away from the other marijuana because they didn't want the seeds. They had to have this stuff isolated. Is that right? No. Anyway, I'm not going to remember the names of these places, but point is, this thing was like the biggest grow ever, and it made shitloads of weeds, and it created tons and tons of new mafioso, big names that we remember. It's guys like El Chapo, and again, I'm not gonna even try to give you the names because it's not gonna make any difference. But the point is that the guy that did this, the guy that set up this new marijuana that had no seeds, that was get you high more and everything else, which everybody loved in the USA, of course. He made a federation. He got the 5 different areas of the gang families to basically join forces. These are guys that are having ruthless wars, killing each other. And they joined forces, so basically that was the first big drug cartel right there. And I'm not talking, when I say drug cartel, obviously people like Pablo Escobar or the Medellin, or the Medellin and the KELLEY Cartel. Those were relatively small groups. These were regions of the entire Mexican country, the regions that were responsible for the transporting of the weed. And they were all connected together under the protection of the government. Now, this story goes on and on. And of course, for me, some of the more poignant characters are the guys from Tijuana, what's his name? Carlos Felix Arellano gang, family. Anyway, Felix Arellano. Anyway, the point is that these were the guys my brother was dealing with, and they were involved. I was hoping I could get this stupid series done before the show tonight, because I know there's a lot of stuff that hasn't happened yet. Like they killed this bishop, and that brings down all kinds of heat. And I know the guys in Tijuana were responsible for that. Laredo, was that another dist area? But anyway, eventually, while my brother was working for these guys, and they were building nightclubs, and one of them, of course, was really fancy one, was in Tijuana. And of course, when you think of Tijuana, you don't think of really nice stuff. But these guys, the cartel, local cartel, had the best club in town. Insane. My brother did whatever, lighting, lasers, whatever, that kind of stuff. And I remember a couple things. I remember that, again, like back in those days, we thought weed was important. And I'm like, hey, man, did they hook you up any weed? Did they send you home with any cool ounces, you can share and blah, blah, blah? This is my thinking. And he's like, nah, these guys, they look down on the weed. They're all about the cocaine, blah, blah, blah. They think that the people that smoke the weed are peasants. And of course, this was the basis of their empire until they got involved with the KELLEY Cartel and the Medellin Cartel. But that was going on. And then I remember that I'm not sure if this was in Mexico City or Baja. It could have been Mexico City. And if it was Mexico City, that would tend to make me think it was a different family. But one of the gigs he was involved in, the principals of the deal were these two brothers. And I know all of these cartel, or all these families, these plazas, a lot of them are brothers. But for me, the Tijuana brothers were the ones that stood out the most. But I always thought it was them. But they got in an argument with each other, and they pulled out their guns, and they shot each other. Now, this is brothers that did this. And when I say shot each other, I'm talking about they both pulled out 9mm. And they proceeded to trade bullets with each other. Bang, I got you. Bang, I got you. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, this was a big lesson for me. This is what I'm telling you. It's like this was a big lesson for me. Because, first of all, these were brothers. I have issues with my twin brother. We're in the middle of this crap. We're just like, I related to these cartel brother guys that were shooting each other. And I also related to the fact that the 9mm didn't kill you quick enough. That's why they could both fill each other full of holes and not die fast enough so that one guy couldn't prevent the other guy from putting bullets in him. So the end result was they both got full of bullets and they both died. And my takeaway from that event was, don't get in a shootout with your brother, but no, it was, don't use a damn 9mm. Use a 45. You only want one shot, and you got to take them down to one shot. Otherwise, you're going to be trading bullets. That stuck with me a long time. Now, sure, is that a good combat lesson? Yes. Is it morbid? Yes. Is it normal? No. Here I am, however many years later, 20 years later, whatever, and I'm looking back on this stuff, and after I'm looking at this movie and the violence and all this stuff, and I'm thinking, holy shit, it's hitting home. Did I freak out about the primaries for this gigs shooting each other. No, I took notes on what to do and what not to do. That was how twisted I was. So this kind of sinks in. It kind of hurts. Now the thing about this show, and I guess I'm just going to cut to the chase. So the thing about all this stuff is ultimately the good guys get the bad guys. But what happened originally after Camarena was killed, the United States allowed special agents to come in. When I say special agents, I mean operators, guys that weren't necessarily CIA. They perhaps might have been DEA or whatever department, something other than FBI, but they were coming in there secretly. They were operating under the radar, and they were doing assassinations. They were an American death squad, and they came in there and they systematically started torturing and executing and extracting information from various players in these various plazas, these families, in order to work their way up to the head guy, which was this guy named Gallardo. Well, obviously the story doesn't stop with Gallardo. It goes on. I mean, this is even before Pablo Escobar gets famous. This is before they really start digging tunnels and all the stuff that they're doing. But when you got down to it, though, one of the things that this guy Gallardo did before he went down that was kind of significant was they had to keep the PRI, which was the predominant party that ran Mexico. It still is. I mean, it has some competition now, but it was always, they had a monopoly on the government. Of course, they were corrupt as hell. Now, I talk a lot about Carlos Slim. I talk about Salinas. But there's a lot of other presidents that were involved. Galvieri. Oh God, I can't even think of all their various names. Echeverria. Hell, there was this one guy. Here's something, a little tidbit I'll throw you. And again, this is a very tangential connection, but it's still there. This was, what was his name? Portillo, Jose Luis Portillo. And I got a job, a jewelry job. This is when I was doing my sideline stuff, back in the day. If you remember Jose Luis Portillo, it was right after he left office in disgrace. He needed money. But he had this big, monstrous gold ID bracelet thing, they call them. And it had his initials on it, JLP, And I remember very distinctively because, for one thing, it was made out of Mexican gold. You knew damn well it was Mexican. I mean, gold is different. Mexican gold is not the same as, say, American gold or gold from the Middle East or gold from Japan or gold from China or gold from Vietnam. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit different color, different purity. And Mexican gold is, let's just put it this way, it's not the purest gold in the world, and the alloys that they use cause it to have some different factors that were not usually associated with, say, your basic Italian 14 karat. It has the tendency to be a little on the red side, almost like a rose gold. But it's not necessarily a good thing, because someone that knows what it is will recognize that it's Mexican gold. But my job was to take this ID bracelet and to remove the initials of Jose Lopez Portillo, remove them, and refurbish this bracelet as much as I could to make it look brand new so somebody could buy it and put their initials on it. So to me, this was a very ignoble fate for the Presidente's gold bracelet. It's like, oh my God. And, just another funny little tangent. But the one tangent that's not so funny, and I know this is going to be sensitive for some people close to me that are probably listening right now, that I know are listening right now, and that is the story of Carlos Slim and Salinas. I'm not going to pronounce his last name because I always screw it up, but Salinas, the real patron for Carlos Slim. Now, before I tell you what happened, I'm just going to tell you, because I already know this, but these guys that are in power, these guys that become presidents, these guys that these high-ranking families in the high levels of the Mexican government, and I'm sure it's the same thing with every government, but we're talking about Mexico right now. They're Satanists. And I know that people that are in families like the whatever family of the president at the time are corrupt and do horrible things. But this one particular family, and this is the family of Salinas, were two brothers. And they grew up fucking crazy. They did horrible things when they were children. Okay, and this is acceptable behavior, and this stuff carries on when they're growing up, and no one is safe around people like this, because if you're not one of them, if you're not one of the elite, it doesn't matter who you are, they're going to kill you if they feel like it, and they're going to get away with it. And that's the true reality, but this is not shown in this TV, this drama series, but it was one of these things that I knew, so I see Portillo come along, and here's the thing, the PRI had a monopoly, and they were going to lose to whoever it was, Cardenas or something like that. And the PRI's candidate, of course, was Salinas. And Salinas was losing very bad. So what happened, the mafia, and of course they dramatized this stuff, I'm sure it actually happened. They rigged the system, the vote counting machine, to cast fake results so that the people in the country that were pro power structure would vote, and the people that were voting against it would lose heart and not bother voting. It was based on promoting Mexico City and then hoping that people watching Mexico City would respond accordingly. Anyway, that plan failed, and it was so bad that they had only one option left, and that was they had to actually change the tallies for each voting district scattered across Mexico, key districts, of course. They had to actually change those numbers to make it look like the PRI had more votes. How are they going to do that? There's only one way to do that. They called in the mafia. The cartels, not any cartel, but the Federation of Cartels. And they went and took their heavies, and they went to every voting precinct, and they basically literally took those tally sheets from whoever was responsible for it, and they added a 0 to the number of votes that the PRI got. And they did that, of course, at least in Guadalajara, Tijuana, Sinaloa, and the other couple places, the Gulf and Laredo. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So the PRI won the election. And because of that, the mafia was allowed to continue. It would have been over the next day. All of those people, corrupt people, the ones in defense that basically ran the weapons smuggling to the CIA and were the heavies, the heavy police and army behind the drug trafficking and the protection racket, they stayed in power. Why does that matter? Well, shortly after the PRI came into power, back into power, they beat off this Cardenas guy, whatever, by this cheating completely with the help of the mafia. What did they do? They privatized the country. They went and took all these components of Mexican society, like the telephone system and Pemex, whatever, various different, what are now large corporations, and they privatized it. They sold it for pennies on the dollar to people that helped the PRI win. And in this case, of course, the biggest winner was none other than Salinas and his gopher, Carlos Slim, who bought the entire Mexican telephone system, the monopoly, along with other things. CMEX, whatever it was they controlled. But this is what made Carlos Slim. Now, when have we seen that happen before? This pump and dump, this disruption of an entire government so that they could cause this privatization and mass sell-off of national assets. Let me see, when was that? Oh, that's right, Russia. When the Soviet Union crumbled and it became Russia, and all the oligarchs were created because they had their money, which were all Jewish, of course, just to throw that out there. They had their money, and they bought up all these things, these national companies like the oil companies and the gas companies and the telephone companies and what have you. They all became billionaires because they paid kopecks on the ruble. Okay? Only here, they were paying centavos on the peso. Okay? And that's what made Salinas, or Carlos Slim, the richest man in the world, and that's what fueled what was coming, which was the real drug wars, which came after the CIA came in there, not even the CIA, but the DEA came in there and tried to get justice for Enrique. Now, of course, the end of the story, it turns out that they didn't want to reveal the people that were really involved. At this point, the actual president, the PRI, that got them in power, because the PRI worked actively with the cartel in order to get Salinas elected so that they could loot the country like they did. They were all involved with the death squads and the Contras and the various different paramilitaries that were operating under the guidance of the NSA or whoever. Well, during each one of these periods, each one of these things, you look at who was in charge. George Bush, Ronald Reagan, Clinton. Even if you look today, well, of course, not yet, but Trump, same thing. It's the same mafia. They're all connected. It's all the same thing. It's never changed, no matter how conscientious someone is. Like Enrique there, Kike, they're going to kill him. You know, I mean, I look at this movie and I look at the stuff that he did, and I think, holy shit, I know what happened to him. I know this person is real. And I think, wow, this guy had to have some balls. But when they throw a bag over your head and toss you in the back of a thing and start beating the shit out of you and begin to start torturing you to death, there's really not a whole lot you can do. It's just kind of a harsh lesson. But I tell you, when we know that the enemy is the same people that's supposed to be stopping it, the same people that's supposed to be protecting us, the very highest levels of the government here in the USA that are supposed to be working together with the government of these other countries to stop this. Instead, we find out that they're using it, they're controlling it, they're part of it, they always were part of it. And they never had any intention of stopping it. If anything, they only wanted to increase it. And then you realize all the innocent people that they will kill, allow to be killed on both sides. Not just the Americans that are taking the drugs and getting caught up in the gangster stuff. We all know what happens. Guys like, well, Gary Webb, of course, 2 bullets to the head. .45 caliber, suicide, one of my heroes. But anyway, like I said, it's all the same thing. And it's when you realize it's all the same thing, you realize that it's so hard, no matter what you do, to not be a tool. When I was dealing with the CIA, when I was getting away from them, the NSA and all that, I was trying to run from there. Every time I did a move, I tried to think, am I being used? Does this decision I'm making serve them? When you realize it doesn't matter what you do, because conflicting motives and conflicting agendas are always part of everything, it's really hard to avoid it. And I knew I was part of it, and that's part of why we're doing this operation, because I want revenge. I want at them for taking away my innocence. I want to do it for Kike, I'm sure he was a tough guy, just like Dirty Dan. I'm sure they did some dirty things to get the information. They put other people's lives in danger, people that were informants who died, providing them with wiretaps and things like this. It was a very, very dirty business. But I've been involved in it in different levels all the time, and so many of us are involved in it. Ultimately, if we don't revolt against the entire fucking system, including our leaders, we're remaining involved in it, which is, of course, the same message of the last show. The government is the enemy. It's always been the enemy. And if you don't want to call it the government, call it the people that run the government, the mafia, Intertel, the cartels, whatever, the Satanists. But it doesn't matter. All right? The only thing that's going to end it, of course, is Occupy the Getty. I can only hope, and trust me, I do think about this stuff. I'd like to think that by now, with whatever effort I've put into this, that I've done enough to atone for whatever I've done, my involvement, stuff that I don't even talk about, okay, that I have yet to ever talk about publicly. There's stuff I've never talked about publicly that I will never talk about. I'd rather remain ignorant. But unfortunately, that's one of the first things that got to go when you become enlightened, and it's never over, and you never get it all, and it just keeps falling in front of you. And that's, again, why we do this Occupy the Getty mission, so that you can see everything in front of your face, and you can lose all ignorance once and for all. Anyway, I did a show here recently with these guys, an interview, tinfoil hat guys. Should be out pretty soon. I'm hoping it's fun. The reason why I think it's important, anytime I do a show now or an interview with somebody, it's extremely important, because being kicked off of Twitter, having no connection, the only thing I've got left now is my content, and I have no clue of how far it's reaching, because I have to depend on all you guys to do this all for me. Okay, and all I can do is try to inspire you and share whatever insight I have, and sometimes it kind of blows me away when I think about this crap, because I think of how close I was to it. And did I get involved? Did I help? How many people did I help kill? How hard do I have to work to make up for it? Anyway, guys, service to others, do what you can. It really is the most important thing in the world. And I want to talk about this again tonight for myself, because I'm still kind of trying to come to terms with it. But at the same time, it's not everyone that gets to say they were part of the Ollie North gang, or they were dealing with the Templars, or they were doing whatever. And I'll tell you right now, I'm still dealing with the fucking mafia. I'm dealing with mafia in a really big way here in California, and it's really old stuff. And of course, I'm also dealing with it in Florida and Las Vegas and everywhere else you expect, Nevada, you know. And again, I really, you know, I'm going to be going to the show in October, and I hope you guys will go. And I'm not saying this because I want to sell tickets, but I hope you're going to go, because I really do want a lot of you around me, all right? So I don't have to worry so much about gangsters trying to fuck with me in a bad way, okay? But at the same time, I've come to terms with my existence and my reality, and I don't shirk anything, and I have great faith in my ability to be undisturbed in my pursuit of this mission. But at the same time, I realize that I am getting old, I'm getting close, it's getting close, and it's up to you guys to step up, because even though I could come off as kind of robust and all that, I'm not. I know I'm not. I'm not kidding myself. I can only do this for so long. I don't want to be another Jordan Maxwell with caretakers and what have you, people trying to manage my stuff, and I can't remember who I'm having an argument with and not, and just trying to talk about whatever, okay? I'm not trying to talk to entertain you. I'm not trying to educate you. I'm trying to save the world. And the only way that we can do that is for you guys to realize that nobody in government is going to save you. Okay? Nobody you vote for is going to save you. It doesn't matter what party. It's all bullshit. Again, like I said last week, the government is the enemy. The government is the cartel. Okay? Get a clue. And speaking of cartels, if you want to help out the Truth Cat Radio Kitty Cartel, you can please send me a donation to PayPal. And you got to say Stephen Kelly 71. Let's see, the address for PayPal, of course, is StephenKelly714@yahoo.com. And you got to say for a friend or family, please. Okay? And I got to tell you, I've been typing that on every single video I'm putting out on Rumble right now, because all my old videos have the improper address. I know it doesn't matter, whatever. I'm not doing this for the money, but at the same time, you can only imagine, right? You can just imagine. So help out if you can, and I do appreciate every little bit. And again, I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in Las Vegas at the Biomed Expo. Was it 14th through 16th, 19th, something like that in Las Vegas. Okay, so go to that.com. Go see. The rooms are going to, it's almost over, okay? It's going to be happening pretty soon. So if you want to go, you need to hurry up and get your tickets and what have you. And I know I'll be there, of course, with my entourage, and we have taken lots of security measures and what have you. And I really hope I'll see you guys, not so much because I want you to hear what I have to say, because most of you have heard what I have to say already. But if you want to meet me and you want to, hang out, this is where you do it. And of course, if your name is Emma or Gray or one of these other assholes, Gary, then we'll probably deal with you before you get close. But either way, I look forward to it. Okay. And I'm welcoming anybody that wants to fuck with me to please also buy a ticket. All right. Okay. With that, let's see what else. If you need to contact me again, law17gun@aol.com is my correspondence email. All right. I wish I could say I could talk to you guys on Twitter, but you know what? I know these things are probably, every one of them is a scam, but one guy wanted 3,800, something like that, 3,800. Another guy wanted 12,000 to get me back on Twitter. And basically that's paying somebody off that works at Twitter to push the buttons and take the flack. Again, I'm just going to assume that stuff doesn't work. But I got to tell you, I wish I was back on Twitter because I feel like it's an important platform. But at the same time, I feel like if I'm not on Twitter, it's kind of like the end of the world. In other words, it tells me that if I can't talk to you, then you're doomed. And I'll tell you, the situation in Israel is going to go crazy real soon. There's nothing that they can do. I mean, it's getting to the point now where even Hezbollah could probably destroy Israel all by itself. I'm serious. It's pretty bad. The United States is being demilitarized just like Europe. It's pretty bad. And the denial and crazy talk coming out of Ukraine. Zelensky trying to push his peace plan when Russia's beating down the gates of Kiev. It's really something. Some big-ass battles are happening right now, and they're not just big-ass battles, but there's one big-ass giant battle across the entire front line. Russia's moving fast, and it's not good for the United States, and they're trying to push. Oh, let me just share one last thing with you guys. Russia just changed their nuclear doctrine. Okay, you can look this up. They have new nuclear protocols that were just announced by Putin, and basically they say that if a country is attacking them, and that country is not a nuclear power, but they are supported by a country that is a nuclear power, they reserve the right to use nuclear weapons against both countries. Okay, that's the new nuclear doctrine. And the reason why they developed this was because they said America just doesn't quite get the value of a deterrent anymore. They're ignoring the deterrent. It used to be the thought of nuclear destruction was enough to keep people from being retarded, but now apparently it's not enough here in America, which isn't because they're retarded, which they are. It's because, no, they want you to die. Okay, why do they want you to die? Because the government is the enemy? The government is a cartel. All right, everybody, I hope you had fun. Thank you for being with me tonight. I look forward to chatting with you in the Telegram group. And find my Rumble thing, please. Not that it matters, but, I'd like to have it's very depressing, okay? I'd like to have a few more followers. I hate the thought that I'm really struggling to reach the masses right now. It really kind of pisses me off. I don't want to think that the enemy has achieved any kind of success in defeating the mission. That's why it's so important that you guys have to really sell me now. Sell my name, sell Occupy the Getty, sell the mission. I need your passion. I need your sweat. I need your energy. I need your devotion. I need all that stuff. I need you guys to work as hard as you can because we don't have a lot of time left to do the work we need to do. I'd love to be able to walk without a cane or a wheelchair when we get there. Okay? I think you guys can help me out. I really appreciate it. All right, once again, this is the Stephen D. Kelly Show, and my name is Stephen D. Kelly. We are Truth Cat Radio, www.truthcatradio. And the Telegram group, of course, is occupiedgetty/Stephen D. Kelly. PayPal is Stephen Kelly 74 at Yahoo. Join me, guys. All right, please. Okay. And again, if you want to talk to me, it's lost17gun at AOL.com. All right. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for being with me tonight and every night at this point from here on out. All right. I'll talk to you all soon. Good night. God bless. Adios and goodbye.